Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Defuse. I'm Alan IHOLDSHIFT on a Frio,
And I'm Austin Visions Neil.
and this is the Defuse. Let's get this fuse lit. We've got a lot of things to talk about, and if there's anything we know about each other here, Austin, is that we try to plan things out for a time limit, and then we double it. So we're going to try to not do that today. But first and foremost, how are your hair's looking very, very polished, very nice. Did you get another
Is
one of
it?
your? Yeah, it's looking pretty solid, dude. Did you get a haircut lately?
I did not. Maybe. Well, I guess it depends on what you consider to be lately. Because for you, it's like, oh
Once a
man, like
week
every
for you, I
month.
feel like
I
getting a
mean, a
haircut.
couple weeks ago. A couple weeks ago. I'm kind of overdue for another one. You know.
I mean, fair enough. You gotta do what you gotta do. You gotta do what you gotta do. We got a lot of things to talk about, including things really at the beginning of this show, all about what's going on with challengers. Then eventually we'll be
Oh
talking about
yes.
all the things that are going on with the ownership in the CDL, including things with OpTic and 100 Thieves. But let's get things kicked off with the challengers news that hit us just earlier this week. Obviously, we expected challengers to still be a thing, but we had a lot of conversations about what could potentially come in the future. I think everybody around us was saying, with all the pros that were previously in the CWL and now from the last year of the CDL, there needs to be some sort of a league. And we're going to get that in some fashion, but we're also going to get a lot of other things around it. So without being too specific, was this an initial announcement exactly what you wanted to hear? Are you hoping for a little bit more? Where are you kind of standing on the overall challengers news we got this week?
Honestly, I'm feeling really good about it. Just personally, just from my point of view, because I wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen with challengers, and I had a feeling that maybe Activision Blizzard was just going to do what they did last year, which was just kind of go forward with these challenger cups. And I feel like those are really great, but at the same time, this kind of creates some depth and a little bit of a line for as far as seeing these top CDL players from last year still have a chance to be able to compete against some top level and not have to worry about playing against people who maybe aren't taking things as seriously when you're going through those like winter round ones and twos and things like that. So I think I'm a little bit happy about that, but I'm definitely surprised, I think, taken back that Activision Blizzard did something this early
Hmm.
for as far as an announcement around challengers and actually put something in place that I think is actually going to fit quite well. And again, it's going to be pretty appealing to the CDL players who are watching these guys to see if maybe they have to go for a change, that there's actually, a viable option to go to a broadcast and be able to pull someone in and be able to sign someone for a couple of weeks like that rule got implemented in the last season. So overall, I think I'm very, very happy with the announcement.
The expansion idea of it, just in full, we had home series that were open series and challengers cups. That was essentially it, with the finals. At the beginning of
Mhm.
last year, there was supposed to be, every single home series would feature a challengers station in some fashion. But then there was also supposed to be a mid-season invitational of some sort that was going to have a challengers main focused event. And then the finals was supposed to be global. And with everything kind of
Right.
being spun around in the opposite direction with COVID hitting, no, I was happy to see what we have here when it comes down to the overall of we have some good, cool expansion stuff coming up. So let's dig into what that expansion stuff looks like. Specifically, starting off, we've got the scouting series, which is really interesting because there have been other games who have done things that are like this, but not necessarily in the same way. So North America and
Sure.
Europe will be able to feature the top 128 total players, 64 from each region, in which essentially over a 4-day event, coaches or GMs could sit there and pick teams to play against each other. I think they said like 46 players or something like that per day would have a chance to play. So my initial reaction is this sounds great. My back end reaction is, will it actually be all that valuable? And with the simple fact that there is not going to be a broadcast, will these players really get the showcase that they're getting? I mean, at a certain point, it's just going to be based on waiting for results and waiting to see what people's reactions are, which I think there could be more done overall when it comes to trying to bring this into the spotlight. Because let's be honest, we're all hungry for competitive COD action, and this would be a really nice little appetizer to get ready for CDL Season 2.
It truly would be, and I think you bring up the good question of, is it going to be valuable? Because I mean, the only thing that might be valuable is, for as far as maybe seeing these individual like CDL owners maybe take a look at a player that's, hey, I want this guy on my team. I want to see what he can do, and that's going to create for a lot more, selfish plays. I think that's going to end up unfolding when you are watching that. It might not be totally for the team because you're trying to impress, and you don't exactly have a whole lot of time to do it. So I don't know how beneficial it's going to be, but it is something that was kind of implemented when I was in the League of Legends scene, where you had something that was essentially called, scouting grounds. So this is
Yeah.
almost that same type of style where you're going to be able to at least take a look at some of the really top talent, and there's always a chance to be able to see if you might be able to get someone on board with them and maybe have like individual players develop and take them on as subs. And there's still things that can kind of follow through with it. But I am maybe just a little bit concerned for as far as not having the exposure that they might deserve. Because if you do have a broadcast around it, or at least have something that's going to be showcasing what they're bringing individually or as a team that you're drafting, then there's something to go off of for as far as maybe then getting the upgrade to challengers, and going into our challengers elite. So that's kind of what I was hoping for, but I am a little bit surprised that there's nothing really going to be revolved around it for as far as being able to actually see these players do something.
Yeah, I would say that overall, I love the idea of this. I think
Yeah,
that
for
when we're
sure.
talking about the fact that last year's Challengers was a pretty grueling affair when it comes to playing every single weekend. Some weekends were for major money with the Cup, some weekends were home series for a little bit less than money. But the fact of the matter was they were playing almost every single weekend. This is a
For
really
sure.
cool idea. Now, the thing behind that, I think, is just the overall value. And when you take the
Hmm.
evaluation of how much are you going to get out of this event, number one, I think that for the most part, players and teams are going to have an idea of who they're already going to be playing with, especially from the amateur
Right.
side of thing. Once we get to the point where we're going to be in the middle of December, which is when this is primed to be. On the backside, coaches and professional players that are already in the league already, I'm sure, have their eyes on players that they're just going to gauge based off of when events eventually come around. So will this actually fulfill any kind of a need? I don't know if I could really say there's going to be a ton of value from it, but I do
Yeah.
think it's going to be really, really cool to still have the ability to go from one year to the next and be able to showcase your skills, at least in some form. Because let's be honest, that is probably one of the biggest question marks when it comes to taking a chance on new players is if they were good in one game, will they be good in the other? And this is at least an early instance of yes, they are, no, they're not, maybe somewhere in between. And even if this isn't necessarily as valuable for CDL teams, this very well could be very valuable for teams that are looking to build academy rosters, which I think is actually more important than picking up one player for your substitute roster for the pro scene.
That's definitely a good point. And on top of that, I mean, for the players too, like when you're thinking of someone who's, going in towards the 2021 season, especially last year, where you're like, damn, these guys are franchising now. We didn't exactly know what to expect for some of these up and comers who have either been competing for a very long time or maybe just looking to get their feet wet in the first place for as far as, hey, do I have what it takes to be able to actually maybe try and make a way, make a career in this? And that's, something that they actually have an opportunity to do now. So I think that's got to feel good for the player standpoint. Again, seeing all this hype around challengers this early is something that at least is going to give them a lot more confidence to maybe go out
Mm.
on a limb and still compete, right? Because I think that there is definitely, a lot of players that stopped competing last year going in towards, the 2020 season or either came back after not knowing what was going to happen for as far as a tier two scene. So I still think it's going to be really good from the player standpoint.
I'm really curious as far as how do you get a chance to pick which players are playing and how often do they get a chance to play,
Yeah,
right? Like if it
that's
is
true as well.
48 players that are being picked up each individual day to play, I mean 64 in total is a large large number. Like if we were to
Yeah,
go
it's a good
back
amount.
like just to take a look overall based on just finishes, top 64, and let me just give you some references, and I'm not trying to throw any kind of shade onto anybody. But when it comes down to who your top 64 are, you're looking at teams that finished 24th in challengers this last year. Like at least top
For
24.
sure.
Like are you really going to be taking a serious look at, Optimum and Infinite and Anthrax and Copier and Pawns? Probably not. And then you got to also keep in mind that we're also going to be inserting into players that were formerly professional that are now going to be
Hmm.
playing in challengers. So realistically for me, like the cutoff of players that really could have a serious go at a CDL spot from one year to the next are probably the players that were in the top 8. Even behind that, it's kind of hard to make an argument. Like making an argument for Apexities, Druxy, Jansport Jake, like sure, great players, but are they CDL level professionals? I don't think so. So that's interesting, I think, overall to see, like, is it just going to be, like, is there some kind of a regulation to how often a player can play before, okay, they've played X amount of games, you have to fill in somebody
Yeah.
else? Or, I don't know. It's going to be really strange, I think, to see how they do those top 48 or whatever that go in from day to day. But taking a look just further beyond that, of course, the regular season will include the Challengers Cups again, which is something that, of course, we're very familiar with from the last year. 5 overall Challengers Cups were played on the online season. Of course, we had the launch weekend and a couple of the home series that were still utilized, and then we had the LCQ and then finals. For all intents and purposes here, though, we have heard nothing about the word home series so far in this announcement. So, With that in mind, my big question is Cups will obviously return, but what happens to those home series events? Will there actually be open events every single weekend for players to play in? And then there are Challengers Cup that have a little bit more weight. I don't even know which I prefer. I think personally, I prefer just seeing Challengers Cups and not as many home series events, pending, of course, we stay online for the entire year. But I don't know. It just seems very strange to go from one year to the next where we've got competition every single weekend to maybe all of a sudden we've only got a couple of cups a year.
Yeah, I guess it is a little weird, right? Where it's probably going to feel honestly different for the players, like where you're so used to playing for everything. I think that's when we got to the off season. These guys were like, I don't know what to do with myself. I feel like every single week we've had something to fight for, something to try
Literally.
and play for, right? So when this off season hit, it hit the players really, really hard. And I think spacing out events is something that I think is really, really important because it feels like there's a bit of a ramp up before the event. And because we had so many events last year that almost went hand in hand with changing and shaking up the roster constantly before Challengers finals. And that was
Right.
obviously a really, really big problem. So if there's more weight going in towards, some of these events and there's a little bit more space, then maybe there's going to be more of a ramp up and there's actually going to be, coaching staff, working with these academy teams that are looking to draft rosters. And that in turn, will create storylines to go up against specific matches and is honestly going to be, a lot more valuable to not only for our broadcast, but also,
So
for
much
something
easier
that the
for
community is
content.
looking at. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
that as well.
Yeah.
So it definitely goes hand in hand with a lot of other things. But I mean, I'm not, I'm not definitely gonna stray away from seeing these Challenger Cups. I still think they're really good. I still think the tournament format is something that's really, really appealing to viewership and
Right.
people like myself to see who came out on top, who plays top eight, things like this. So if they go forward with it and still have that top eight bracket that goes into double elimination, then I think I'm still okay with that. And it's always a good time.
It's going to be interesting because at a certain point there needs to be that bridge between the players that obviously are just kind of getting into competitive for the first time. Maybe they're still trying to figure out
Yeah.
what exactly that looks like, and getting those reps in rehearsal I think is great. But even more so if you can get those reps in rehearsal away from those top tiered teams. And there is at least something that we could put in mind when it comes to that specifically this next year, because Challengers Elite has been announced, in which there will be
Yes.
multi-week round robin style events that are happening, kind of similar to what I imagine Overwatch Contenders had done in the past, where you take your top 8 teams, you put 4 in one group, 4 in the other, you round robin
Hmm.
each other, top teams go into a playoff bracket, you're good to go. I'm happy about that. Very, very happy about that. It would be even better if you've got 8 teams and they do just one group, 8 teams, everyone plays each other at least once, if not
That'd
possibly
be cool.
twice before you get to the playoff, because that means more games are happening, more fun to watch, things like that. But this is going to be the first time that we're going to get a separation, not just between professionals and amateurs, but now I think we can start to list these guys as the semi-pros. You've got your tier 2, and
Yeah.
now you're starting to build a little bit of a tier 3 behind that. The question is just, when Challengers Elite is going on, what is the synergy between the elite format that's going on and the cups that are happening behind it? Because everything is based off pro points. I don't know. I personally, we'll get into that here in a minute, but personally, I'm very, very excited to see that we are going to be getting an elite style league for both EU and NA this next year.
It's gonna be awesome, man. Like this is, I think, really what a lot of us wanted. Specifically us, Alan. Who spend a lot of time within
Absolutely.
challengers, right? We want to see that difference, and we would love to see something from a tier three to a tier two type of perspective, which is something we're gonna get. And I think it was very, very important that we didn't have, previous CDL players from last year, going up against, some players that might just be looking to play for fun and not taking it that serious, because for them it's kind of just a little bit of a waste of time. Where this is looking to be like, okay, you're going up against the top 8 teams in our region here. So
Every
there's a
single
lot
day
more
you
weight
play.
on it. Yeah. So
Yes.
every single match, it feels like you're going in, with the same intensity that you would if you were playing a CDL match. And that's very, very important for these guys to be able to keep that and maintain that, where they want to get back to that spot, right? Because it's just inevitable that, we had to drop some players from CDL. It's just unfortunate what happens when you go from 5v5 to 4v4. So this is their way and their window to be able to get back up towards that CDL spot here. And I'm still very, very happy and impressed with Activision Blizzard again, releasing this news very, very early on to see some top level competition whenever CDL is not going to be playing for us.
100%. I was blown
Hmm.
away that we got the announcement this soon, before the game is even
Yeah,
released, to get some form
it's
of a
insane.
schedule as far as what we're going to be expecting for challengers. Super awesome when it comes down to it overall, but there are some elements of it that are not so super awesome. The
Fair.
APAC region is going to be in a very tough spot this year. They are not
Hmm.
available for the scouting grounds. They are not available to have even a Challengers Elite League. They can play in Challengers Cups, But now you're looking at teams like Renegades from last year, which they just announced their roster, which will include Luca and Shox from the Paris Legion the previous year. If you're an APAC, you're doing what Cruz just did. You're moving.
Yeah,
You
you're
are
moving, man.
moving because
What
it
choice do you
doesn't
have?
make a difference. Even if Renegades, they win every single event again this next year, no one is going to give a damn because when Challengers Elite is established, everyone that's looking for a professional player to come up from the amateur scene is going to be looking at Challengers Elite first.
Yep.
This is a moment, if you're Pred, you're out there saying, get me to the States, get me to Europe. We need to get this team going. And if you're the Renegades, you move that group of 4 to Detroit in your headquarters, put them in an apartment building, let them compete in North America. There is no better way to represent your brand, and there's no better way to represent those players.
It's really tough though, Alan, because we see, especially you, I want to say, I think this probably hurts you more than most. And because you have a lot of love for that region and to not see
I
them
do.
continue to be able, right? Like it's pretty obvious. So I feel for you a little bit here because this is something I think that is really, really unfortunate. And there's a lot of players that, deserve the recognition that, they put on last year. Like Renegades put on an absolute clinic the entire year and won event after event after event and proved their worth and were
They
able to
finished
come
top
out on
6 at
top.
Minnesota. I mean,
Like, like it just feels like the accolades go on and on and on and on. And it just now doesn't feel like they're getting the backing that maybe they deserve. And at the same time, I guess I understand it because it doesn't feel like maybe there's enough competition in APOC. So maybe we're just seeing, Activision Blizzard saying, hey, like, listen, like, this is not going to be worth it for us. But like, that's a tough decision for Renegades to say, okay, what do we need to do? Do we need to move this roster and say, all right, you guys did absolutely phenomenal last year. Let's see if you guys have what it takes to go toe to toe just for maybe even a trial period, right? To see if you actually can continue to do what you were doing at Minnesota, like you had said, placing top 6, having good placings, and be able to move your way in towards the States or Europe, wherever you want to locate yourself and have a chance at being able to compete against the best. Because that feels like what they have to do. Their hands kind of being forced in the situation where it's like you can continue to play there and play for Challenger Cups, but that's not going to be looked at as heavily as the Challengers Elite Series will be, unfortunately.
I'm wondering if there is an opportunity or the ability, because everything is based off pro points, which we'll talk about here in a second. But for APAC, if you are at the top of your pro points in your region, can you transfer those pro points to North America? Like if you go over and you play North
Right.
America like Singularity did, can you jump over, play a couple of cups in North America, maybe get your pro points in APAC like reduced by 50% because it's whatever, you're not in North America, but you're still winning? Like, can like at least 50% of your points translate to another region? Because then they could move just like Singularity did and do some house in Michigan or maybe even Texas for the span of what would be maybe a cup or two plus a Challengers Elite season. Because then if you qualify, you can play it in North American Challengers Elite. I think there needs to be something for those guys to be able to do. I'm right there with you. The simple fact of the matter is there are not better than 6 teams in APAC, and even then it would be a stretch to think that the top team would have a headache versus anyone outside of the top 3. So you're looking at a pretty wish-washy kind of region when it comes to competitive integrity, but not giving the league an opportunity to build itself in APAC, I think hurts a lot of great players. And I think overall, outside of the players that it hurts, it actually hurts the overall development of the region in some fashion because, again, they're not playing for nearly. Yeah, it's a tough situation, I think, overall, but one that I hope that there is something to go in the future, which brings us to our next point. Pro points is going to be the basis for not just how you earn your way into potentially the Elite League, but that is literally how you qualify for it, is based off your team's accumulative pro points. Pro points has been around for almost the entirety of competitive Call of Duty. There are a lot of discussions that are happening online right now that are people saying, if so-and-so didn't have as many pro points as they did, would you actually team with that person? And the results of that poll were more towards no than they were towards yes. So with pro points potentially impacting team decisions more than what is best for you as a player or a team or an organization going into this year, do you think pro points needs to be looked at and maybe even redacted in some form?
I think so, man. Like I used to compete and I used to have to play an insane amount of GBs that didn't matter every single day. And from someone who's been able to experience that and seeing me get, 15 points per match when you're spending half an hour to 45 minutes per game, and you have to get at least 5 in before the end of the day. Like that's cutting into your scrim time. That's cutting into all kinds of things. So the fact that I think that pro points are still even, like involved in our scene is honestly a little bit frustrating. I don't know what the solution would be because you have to be able to rate and judge these
Right.
players off of something, right? So
And
like I
how do
do
you
again get
seed
that
week to
standpoint.
week? Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's a really tough situation. I don't know what the solution is, but I just know that it's not healthy, to be able to say, "Hey, I don't want to compete with this player even though he's really good and really up and coming and maybe didn't play a lot all last year, but hell, he's really good at Cold War, but I can't pick him up because that's going to affect our standings and that's going to affect our overall pro points as a team and so and so is going to bump up and it creates this whole dramatic type of scene that I don't think is really healthy at all for our tier 2 and tier 3 scene, but it is what it is. So
It's
it's
tough, man.
unfortunate, Alan. I'm not a fan.
So the only solution that I could possibly think of is that you run the Challengers Cups as not a standalone tournament, but a system of days like how Overwatch ran their Open division, which was essentially a weighted Swiss system where it was like 5 weeks of Overwatch Open. You played teams kind of at random. You win. The winners move into the winners group. The losers move to the losers group. Then you match up versus them. So the weighted Swiss system eventually gets to the point where if you're 5-0, you're only going to play up against other teams that are 5-0. So you eventually get
Okay.
down the line to the point where your matches mean more. The problem is tournaments have been the backbone of competitive Call of Duty since day one.
They
So
have.
it's really difficult, but it's just been, I think, really abusive because you've got at the low end players who have to play these daily GBs just to earn whatever points they can get to try to maybe help their seeding. So that way they don't have to play up against whatever the top 8 seeds are. Give yourself a chance to see the top 32 or 64, wherever the pro points actually gets earned for that tournament. But on the other front, on the top side, you've got players that are picking and choosing teammates based on who has the most pro points, so that way
Yeah.
their overall seed is better. It's not a great system. I don't know if there's a solution, but it definitely feels frustrating. I think you're going to see that early on this year because you've got a bunch of pro players that never played challengers that passively earn all of those pro points per week, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that. I don't know. It's kind of tough. I don't know. I don't know how I feel
Uh,
about it.
I think I know how you feel about it, Alan.
I mean, like
It doesn't feel really
I
good. I
don't
don't
love
know.
it. It doesn't feel good when you look at the negative side of it, but the problem is there's no good solution to those problems that would exist without being able to individually weight players based on how they individually have performed. There's always going to be some kind of a misdivision when it comes down to the individual versus the team at large. I think that's the tough part.
Yeah, like I just think it's like really unfortunate because like all these rising players come out of nowhere all the time and mainly come from the search and destroy scene to be fair. And there's a lot of
Sure,
search and
sure.
destroy players that did not grind out their pro points last year but are insanely good at the game. So like when you're thinking of things for as far as like a risk standpoint, when you're looking at trying to create a team around you and you might have a team of 2 right now for as far as, a couple of top challenger players, like are you going to be willing to take a risk on someone who doesn't exactly have pro points to be able to back you up and help
Right.
your seeding, but is really good? Like that's my whole argument for as far as not being able to get maybe the best opportunity you can simply because you weren't grinding pro points, but instead you were, doing something else that's going to be able to maybe build up your name or build up your stream, your brand,
Right,
whatever it might be.
right.
So I just think it's really unfortunate, man. And I mean, I feel like there has to be an alternative solution because this has been a problem for a very, very, very long time. And I mean, people like Censor back in World War II was like, why am I playing 5 matches a day that don't really mean anything, but I have to get my pro points in? So
Right. It feels like one of those
problematic.
situations that there are two evils in the system of how do you keep tournaments to be alive, how do you seed those teams versus how do you individually weight teams based on the seeding. And there's like a lesser of two evils, I think, play at hand here. So I don't know. My overall reaction though, is this enough for you going from 2020 over to 2021? Personally, I like that this is where the start of this season is going to be.
Me too.
However, the one big caveat, and it just depends on what happens to the state of the world, is that APAC has been completely neglected with this system, at least in the form that the ability for them to go pro is about to become even harder. Last year,
Yeah.
everyone was on even footing. Everyone had Challengers Cups. Everyone had points. Everyone had results. There were a couple of things that happened that were at the beginning of the year on LAN. They got, the top 2 teams from APAC finished top 12. Now you're going to a world where if you are a GM, you know first and foremost that Challengers Elite is the next up scene. And you're not going to ever see a name from APAC unless that player moves to Europe or North. With this in play, I think there needs to be some attention given towards trying to find a way to make a midseason LAN happen, and lastly, a finals LAN happen. So these APAC players have a chance to play up against North America and Europe, to have a chance, because goodness gracious, the conversation around Pred, conversations about Luca, Shocks, Fida, all Dens in the past, all of them have led to different outcomes, successful and unsuccessful, and that conversation needs to still exist.
I think so, man. Like, I think that being able to have like a mid-season type of tournament where all these challenger players do get together and having something like this pending, of course, what's currently happening with the pandemic and whatnot, like that would be the best case scenario. And it's also a
Hey,
lot more
top
drive,
20.
right?
Why not do
Yeah,
top
like
20? Top 8 from Europe, top
I
8
think
from
that's
North
fair.
America, top 4 from APAC. Get them all in one spot. Let's do it.
That could absolutely work, and like it feels like they would be a lot more hungry to prove themselves because it just feels like they're completely left out of the picture right now. And you can only imagine what they're going through, mentally as players. Like, where do we go to next? Like, it feels
Right.
again like you're forced to basically move. So, I think that would be awesome to have something like that for sure.
I think that something along those lines could be a potential consideration. I think it just comes down to the scheduling with the elites as well. If the world opens
Sure.
up to the point where travel is going to be more safe, more okay,
Hmm.
the ability to take your playoff contenders from North America, your playoff contenders from Europe, put them in a top tier seed, and then get the rest of the elite division from North America and Europe and your top four that are overall pro points or whatever from APAC, get them into one location, see how they fare. Because I maintain that at the end of this last year for Modern Warfare, Renegades finishes top four. Without question, they finished top four.
Yeah. All
Austin's
right.
not so sure
I,
about that. They played
I,
clean Call
I,
of
I
Duty.
think that's fair. I think that's fair because like they stuck together too, and I always have like a lot more faith in a team that sticks together rather than a team that's pretty much swapped up every once in a while. And yeah, we had teams that were forced to stick together based off the challengers finals going into it, and I think they were playing really really well. They were definitely levels above, right? And when you're levels above,
Absolutely.
that you got to give them some credit for as far as what they might be able to do and what kind of impact they bring to a different region that's not used maybe to their play style, not used to how they're playing, maybe different little things that could throw them off. So I think that's a fair point. I don't know if I would say top four, Alan, but I think up there for sure,
Top
up
four.
there for sure.
Top four for sure. And they're all going to get nastier next year. That's the other thing. But stepping away from challengers and taking a look at the CDL, a lot of things have happened in the last couple of weeks, including the repurchase of OpTic Gaming from Hecz. A lot of things come into mind. And the first thing you have to remember is that you cannot own two franchise spots in the league.
True.
So with that, there have been a couple of things that have happened, but the brand is now under ownership of Hecz. Hard to say if that's under the NRG umbrella or not. I don't really know the specifics of that legal detail that came
Mhm.
through, or did Hecz individually repurchase the brand. But regardless, that means that OpTic Gaming LA no longer exists. And with that, obviously, there's the potential of OpTic being taken back under the wing of Hecz. So in the immediate, Hex's OpTic is now a thing again. What are you looking forward to with that reestablishment?
I'm looking forward to see, the actual OpTic Gaming brand be relevant again. Like, let's just make it simple. Like, for a very long time, since Hex has left, like that entire fan base had either shifted over to a different team
Or we're completely
and
divided on one.
or
Yeah.
yeah, like it was just like insane. And I felt like it didn't feel like OpTic. Like without having Hex and Scumpy compete for that roster, it's just it doesn't feel right. Especially, since seeing those guys compete and being like an OpTic fan, since I came to the scene when I was like 14 years old, it just didn't feel right, didn't sit well with me. So I think that this now feels like it's what it belongs. Like this is how it's supposed to be. Hex is supposed to be the owner of OpTic. We're going to get that good content again, just like we were getting all year with the Huntsman. But it puts a lot of different situations, on hand now for as far as, okay, so he's not going to be able to, own the Huntsman. So, like, what happens here? What is Andy thinking, the co owner of NRG as a whole? So,
Right.
that's now an interesting spot that we don't really know exactly what's going to happen just yet. And then there's obviously rumors of for as far as who's going to be picking up that LA spot as well. So, there's a lot happening here. And I feel like there's not a lot of answers. There hasn't exactly been anything like officially released from Hecz, as far as I know, at least. I don't know if he's actually released anything for as far as what's happening and what's going to take place for us. I could be wrong on that, but I feel like it's a very weird spot to be in right now for as far as actual fans and saying, do we go back to being an OpTic fan here, Alan? Like, is
Right.
this the
Yeah.
time, right? Like, or what's going on? So it's a very weird spot, but I'm glad that it's happened, to say the least.
My whole thing with this is I'm wondering on what the strategy is going to be for both brands. because NRG
Yes.
still own the Chicago Huntsmen. Hecz, I think, individually owns OpTic. I could be wrong there. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I want to say that
Right.
Hecz individually owns OpTic. So for right now, OpTic does not exist in Call of Duty specifically.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
And with that in mind, I'm just wondering on what Hex's overall strategy is. Because we'll talk about this, I guess, a little bit later. We'll let that marinate in your minds for just a moment here as we talk about what's coming up next, which is the potential of a Chicago rebrand. That would be the only other way at the moment that OpTic gets back into the CDL as a name. The problem with that is that the CDL going into year 2 does not want to see the ownership name or brand change of one of their major franchises. Going from
True.
the Chicago Huntsmen, top 3, most followers, best content, probably. How do you
Yeah.
just
Best
get
content.
rid of that? And then all of a sudden, this team that was OpTic Gaming LA becomes OpTic Gaming Chicago. Very difficult. This is not something that's unfamiliar, though, about how sports franchises in the past have changed hands. You specifically look at teams like the Lakers. They were initially in Minnesota. The Los Angeles Lakers make no sense. The Minnesota Lakers makes a lot more sense. Same thing with the Jazz. New Orleans to Utah. They hold their name, they move their city. So the ability to potentially take one brand and change locations is not an unconceivable idea. The problem is the freshness of the league and the volatility when it comes around moving something that big so early. What is your kind of thought, though? Would you rather see it change to OpTic Gaming Chicago, or would you rather see it be the Chicago Huntsmen going into the future?
It's actually such a hard question because I want to see Optic Gaming be in the league and in the franchise. And I think it's going to be a lot different when you actually have, the real brand, which was essentially Huntsman, right? Like that,
Right.
that's really what Optic Gaming had turned into, like, to be completely honest. And I think it would be really nice to still see Optic Gaming a part of the franchise because they always have been. Like, as long as you can think back, when you think of like the most popular team, in history, like it's always been Optic Gaming in this specific esports. So I think it'd be really, really weird to not have it. But at the same time, it's like, are you really going to, like you said, get rid of your biggest franchise name right now, Chicago Huntsmen, and change that over? Like, that's the biggest question that I have for myself. But I think the short answer to your question, yes, I would like to see Optic Gaming take over the Chicago for as far as the city and have them still implemented within the CDL.
I 100% agree with that for multiple levels. I think from, again, going back to the strategy side for Hecz, it makes life so much easier. You can
For
now
sure.
make all of your OpTic content behind the banner of Chicago. You can keep doing all the same Chicago Huntsman shows, but you just change the look and the feel of it to not be the Chicago Huntsman. It's now no longer on the hunt. It's now back to the green wall. And again, it's one of those things, and I'll bring this up, like, there is Chicago all over the place. Like, I'm no stranger to Chicago. I cannot tell you a single person who has ever been considered a huntsman from the area of Chicago. This doesn't exist. This doesn't
That's fair.
exist. That's the only gripe. Hecz, I love it. Love what you're doing. But where do the huntsmen come from? I've got no idea. Beyond that point, though, as we get into what's coming up next, there is also another idea that needs to be at play here. Because if OpTic Gaming Chicago becomes a thing, now you have the establishment of Scump under OpTic, which is cool. But beyond that, you've got the ability for Hecz to sell the LA spot to his buddy Nadeshot in 100 Thieves. And what's that current roster? Most of what 100 Thieves was during the CWL year. So as far as overall continuity goes between 2019 to now, the brands do not become too mistakable. I think overall, based on the players that are there, the ownership that is there, and now the cities that are being represented. With that potential rumor, though, the LA Thieves is pretty much going to be one of the worst kept secret, I think, of this offseason, are likely going to be that team in LA. Nadeshot back into it, purchasing up of that OG LA spot. I couldn't be more happy. It's been weird because 100 Thieves as a competitive enterprise from their esports side have been selling off a ton of rosters, which was surprising, but they've also been dumping a lot of money into their Valorant team. So if they were to become a Valorant and a COD team again, fine with it. Happy with it.
I'm good with it. I want to see Nate Shot back in the scene. I feel like everyone does. He's like the godfather of really what started to kind of make Call of Duty blow up, and Black Ops 2 is a huge part of moving that content. Scumpy as well, but I think Nate had a real personal touch with his viewership, and that's what really made Optic Gaming, it felt like, for
Agreed.
such a long time. So I am honestly ecstatic to see him back in the scene. Also, Optic Gaming doesn't really play the villain role too well for as far as last year, right? Like they tried, then they really missed with some of their content. Let's be
Yeah,
honest, it
really.
wasn't exactly all there. So I feel like with the backing of someone like Nate Shot, who is going to be able to maybe still fulfill this whole kind of villain role in the sense of the scene and what we have for us, I think that it's going to work perfectly, especially with another team being able to provide like top level content is something that I think is going to be really appealing to Activision Blizzard as well, right? Like being
Yes.
able to get that for yourself is going to be massive because you have a couple of top teams that are doing it, but not all of them are essentially there with their fan bases and have the backing exactly for as far as what they're getting with viewership and things like this. But I feel like with LA Thieves, that's not going to be a problem whatsoever. Nate Shot's going to be able to still provide that hype, and he always provides, I feel like, that really authentic type of energy that makes you want to root for his team. So it's just like a win-win for the CDL if this really is a true fact coming in for 2021.
And with that, we'll just talk right back about that again. It's just one of those things that, as somebody who was not 100% familiar with the story of Nate Shot while he was a player, came into Black Ops 4. Obviously, like my first reaction was when I was asking people about, okay, who's the players to look out for? What is the look at, for Black Ops 4? Almost everybody inconceivably that watch out for 100 Thieves. They just picked up 4 of the best players in the recent last 2 years of Call of Duty. They're primed to be a juggernaut, and they gave us one hell of a show along the way, even though their start was a little bit shakier than they would have liked. Regardless of that point, though, like you mentioned, Dallas has done a pretty solid job on content.
Yeah.
Minnesota has done a pretty solid job on content. But nobody's doing content like Chicago has been doing. The only team back in the CWL that was doing content like OpTic was with that same ownership was 100 Thieves. And I think the more content we get, the better. Maybe E United you could say as well, because obviously they had a very successful year. And as they continued to do better, people continue to watch their stuff. I think the fact that Nate is back in, this actually is not just meaning that it's going to be great for the CDL this next year, but I think this is going to mean, and it's going to show the identity of what ownership in COD looks like. You cannot just go and sell your company and this franchise spot to some big enterprise and expect them to have the same relevancy that people that have been in the scene have provided. We get that from OpTic, we get that from Hecz, and now we're going to get that again with 100 Thieves, the LA Thieves, with Nade Chat most likely.
Yeah, I can't wait, man. I love Nate Shot. Like it's just no, I'm not hiding. It's not a secret, anything like that. So I mean, I'm not opposed from having this man back in towards the CDL. I'm really hoping it's true because there's been a lot of videos over the past 2 years on why he hasn't been able to get a team in
Capital's
towards
wild
CDL,
to
right?
do it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And he has a lot of investments in a lot of other esports. So like I got that standpoint. So like I'm really hoping this ends up to be true and isn't just some big buildup of guys like we're not putting a team into the CDL for 2021. I don't know where you got this from, but I mean at the same time it's like LA Thieves has a really nice ring to it. It feels
Really
like
does.
it's their Nate Shot.
Really
right
does. I mean, he's wearing literally a shirt that says Thieves right there. That could just be their jersey
Right?
for all I care. I'm fine with
there
it.
you go.
But the interesting thing about this purchase, and I kind of leaned it in a moment there, is talking about what the future of the CDL looks like. And
Sure.
I again, like having OpTic with Hecz just makes sense. Having
Yep.
Nade Shot and 100 Thieves in some capacity under ownership of a team in the CDL makes sense. I would love to see United get back in the mix. Would love, love to see United get back into the mix. I would even love to see Heretics get back in the mix because what they did over the course of the time during their prevalence in Spain was it wasn't just the fact that they put together a good team. They brought Spain to Call of Duty. I mean, you go back and think about CWL with Black Ops 4, even during World War II, all of the Vamos that was just being spammed, it was not just meme worthy. There was a lot of authenticity behind it. And not having Spanish representation, I think, is pretty criminal. So with that in mind, I'm thinking that as spots are now being sold, that precedence has now been established. There are certain teams out there, like Paris, that are not doing a good job whatsoever with their organization as far as not just what's happening currently in the CDL, but now also with what they were doing at their Overwatch League spot. I think this is the time that if you're Activision Blizzard, you essentially go and say, how can we make purchasing viable for our biggest promoters and owners in the past when it comes to Call of Duty? Because understanding the scene, I think, is more important than throwing out an extra $1 or $2 million to get the spot.
I'm just really, really concerned with, like you say, you bring up teams like Paris, and it feels like maybe they're just holding the spot to be able to sell it at a better price and be able to, take an advantage
Right.
off of it later down the line. Where they're like you said, it's not even like it's just this league, but it's also the Overwatch League where they're just looking to play a minimum. That's it. Like, so that goes to tell you that they don't really care if they're winning or losing during the season, right? At
They're
least
just
that's
holding
what
on to
reads
an
to me.
investment. I
That's exactly it,
100%
right?
agree. 100% agree.
So that's what rubs me, I think, the wrong ways, because we want competitive integrity across the board. I felt like last year we really got it. We got 6 teams that had won, a CDL championship throughout the year, and that's not something I feel like we've seen in a really long time. So I felt like that was really, really big for as far as what we got in the very first season. But when you have teams that are starting to look at this like, well, I don't know if I want to spend the money. Let's just pay the minimum, get an average team. Maybe we'll get 10th. And if you're shooting for 10th, it's like, why are you even here? So I don't know. I think that's what really rubs me the wrong way. And I think that, yeah, Activision Blizzard probably has to step in at some point in time and maybe look at, like you said, Heretics, or having a team that might really try to, drive and be able to use the fan base that they already have and the backing that they have, and be able to kind of go forward with that, with a core 4 roster that maybe
Yes.
could make some waves, and you could try to implement to be able to say, hey, like, this is a team that we might be able to get towards the top 6, and that's something that you can at least go forward with. So I really hope that changes, because right now we still don't know what's happening with Paris, and I don't even
It's
know if
wild,
anyone
man.
wants to, because when that roster gets released, it's going to be a big shock to the community, I feel like.
They have to take Wuskin and Scraps.
It feels like it.
That's all I got to say about
And
it.
will
You
they
have to
take
take it.
50K? No way.
No chance they will. 11 days, brother. Just 11
Woo!
days. Week
Thank
and a
God.
half, and Cold War is here. I know
Thank
you're
God,
ecstatic about it. I'm pumped about it. I was on the golf course yesterday with Proper. He's pumped about it. We're all ready to go. And the thing about it is, what are you most willing to see on launch in 11 days? What's the one thing you want to see?
I want to see league play, man. Give
Let's
me some
go,
league play.
baby.
As
League
soon
play
as I
day
get
one.
in there, that's what I want, man. I don't want any like World War II stuff where it's like, we've heard your concerns and we're gonna release league play at the end of December or the beginning of December. It's like, no. We want it right now. Like, that's what really I think is gonna be like extremely exciting, especially with the ramp up towards the CDL. Imagine if we have a really good rank play system in place that's
You've
gonna be
got
able to pull in
scouting
more
grounds
viewers. You have, scouting
in a
grounds, you have
month.
free, you have everything. You have like free advertisement for as far as that popping up in the bottom right hand corner saying, hey, Challenger Series coming up. Do you have what it takes? Blah, 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 blah. These little things you can implement. That's what I want to look forward to. 2, I'm excited for it because I've been playing the hell out of League of Legends and I'm ready to pull my hair out because I think I've shaved 15 years off my life in solo queues. So I want it really bad, Alan, because things have not been great lately for gaming.
Oh no, dude, that's the toughness
brutal.
right there. That's a whole
It's
other
brutal.
level of brutality that I was not ready for. No,
Yeah,
I
you
don't
were
think
not. I wasn't either.
I don't think we're gonna get league play on launch. But if we can get it
Probably
within the
not,
first
but I hope.
month or two, happy about it. I just don't want to see what we had with Black Ops 4, where it was like, it's coming in December. Never mind, it's coming in January. Never mind. See you in February. Never mind. It's here in March. Like, don't do that. And I mean, a lot of that was behind the fact that they were trying to like reinvent the wheel for a ranking system. There's going to be scrimmages throughout the week, and then on the weekends you can earn your rank. Huh? No, let's just run out something that is just give me bronze to masters, ready to go, dude. That's all I need. Or maybe special agent is top level since it's all Cold War and CIA. And,
there we go. There we go.
Dude, yeah,
They should hire you, Alan.
I know, dude. I'm just here giving out free ideas. I don't know about all that. Speaking of free ideas, though, coming up tomorrow for you guys, Off the Rip returns, and it's going to be an absolute banger. Challengers 21 reactions and expectations from 3 of the best to ever do it. Not just in Challengers, but across even their time as professionals. Parasite, Royalty, and Exotic will be joining me tomorrow to talk over everything Challengers in 2021. I imagine we're going to get a lot of very raw and unfiltered takes about things that have happened in the past and things that are coming in the future. That will be happening at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern right here. Beyond that time, though, we will be looking for viewer questions. So, hey, why don't you go ahead and start dropping them down in the chat below? Just do it. Do it. Hey, just do it right now. We'll start to respond to them as you have them. The biggest thing, when it comes down to what we have at the moment, again, I think the biggest thing that could possibly happen between now and CDL season 2 is what happens with Hecz and Chicago, or really, I guess, Hecz and OpTic. Again, I don't know if it's
Yeah.
an umbrella of NRG now owns OpTic and Hecz is overseeing that, or did Hecz go off on his own as a self-proprietor and buy OpTic? Because if that's the case, the only way that those two things fuse is if NRG essentially takes over OpTic, because NRG owns the Chicago spot, right? Like, that's the
That's
case.
right.
So you can't just immediately turn Chicago into OpTic Gaming Chicago, because if that's an individual enterprise, that again now leaves NRG without us. But they would have to sell that spot to Chicago, so or
True.
to Hecz rather. So I just don't see that happening, and I just don't know that. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. Would Hecz really put the strategy in play to still run OpTic, but it would be underneath the banner of NRG? Like, there's some weirdness there. I don't know if that's
Mm.
something that he would be willing to do, but
Yeah,
weird.
because he co-owns energy, right? So
Yes, yes.
I mean, it's a lot of people aren't also looking at the point of view from Andy, like this. And if you don't know Andy, Andy Miller, he's
Those
like the
those two guys are
founder or
homies.
CEO. They're really close. They're really good. They do that energy podcast together. They do a lot of content together. I feel like they have gotten close, like you said. And I think Hex found a lot of those little fundamentals on why Andy got into esports.
Sure.
Kind of falls in line with why Hex did too. So yeah, so I think the synergy between them is really, really good. And I can see Andy being very understanding from the point of view of like, hey, like this is, like essentially your baby. You grew this up and now, someone stole it from you and you have the chance to be able to take it back. And
Right.
likely he probably did. So like I can get that from Andy's point of view because he owns an organization. He knows what that could feel like and understands the value of being able to own that. So there's that, but then there's also like, hey, like I also own a really successful CDL franchise right now, the biggest one essentially out of all 12. Do I want
Yeah.
to try and rebrand this and take the risk and all the other stuff that goes behind who's under who and whatnot? So it's just a lot of questions I feel like that fall in line with what's going to happen heading in towards
It's going
2021
to
with
be
it.
interesting. These next couple of months are going to be no slow time for Hecz. That's for sure. Good question
No.
coming from GMAT. Is now the time for amateur organizations to invest into the challenger scene, given the outlook on this season? My initial response would be yes, but yes, it is the time to get involved with challengers. But you
Mhm.
need to make sure you've got a team that can get you into the Elite Series. Yes, this is the time to get into
True.
challengers, but is it going to be dominated by academy rosters? There is a lot that comes into the mix, and I think unless you're in challengers elite, there might not be as much of a reason to be involved with challengers, kind of like last year. Be
Yeah.
my overall reaction.
I think that's fair. Like, you're not going to want to be, an amateur organization putting out, whether it's like tourney prizes or rather tourney fees for as far as getting them in there or, giving
Exactly.
them jerseys, whatever it might be, if you're not getting anything out of it. Right. And the most important thing is definitely the exposure of having that team on stream being broadcasted. And if that's not happening, like you said in the Challenger series, then there might not be any incentive to go ahead and do it. So I think everything's going to revolve around Challengers Elite, and I do think it's going to be filled up, pretty much by CDL Academy teams, which is really good, I think, in hindsight, to have these academy teams implemented because that's also something that we can look forward to going towards the future of maybe having every single
Sure.
team with an academy team, and that's really really important for our tier 2 scene as well.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is that if you are an amateur organization, I'll just tell you right now, the organizations that will be the most successful, maybe not by overall social branding, maybe not by overall exposure, but financially, the organizations that will be the most successful that are amateur organizations getting into COD are the ones that will spend money to get big players so that way they can sell those contracts to pro teams in the future.
True.
Definitely gonna have to spend money to make money in this instance, and I just don't know how many amateur organizations out there can afford to do something like that. Because I mean, again, you're going to be dealing with mostly again former pro players that are going to be taking up the top level of North American, at least
Exactly.
North American contenders, especially or challengers, especially. Would you say the level of competition has increased going into Cold War and potential stars this year? A level of competition 100% has increased going into Cold War this next year. Potential stars, I think Standy, potential star this next year.
Yeah, I like
I
that.
think Noisy, potential star this next year. I'm trying to think of Europe. I think Afro, potential star this next year. Um, I mean, there are already people that I consider stars. Like Dave is already a star in my eyes. He's going to be a star again. So that's kind of a brief answer, I think, overall.
Yeah, I think Fire is one for me for North America for as far as a potential
Good one.
star.
Yep,
I
very
think
good one.
he had a lot of really big moments during the season, and I think he learned a lot from Parasite as well. Someone who's been kind of teaching him the ropes through this entire offseason. So I think that's definitely one. And I'm trying to think of the AR player that played in Challenger Finals. I can't think of.
Diamond
None. Diamond Con's one as well because out of Toronto, definitely one, but not on Triumph. But I'm trying to think on the team that we're playing against. Can't think of the team and the AR player that was on there.
Oh, Nightmare from Carnage?
Just Nightmare. Yeah, I think Nightmare is actually really underrated. I think he had a really, really strong Challengers Finals, and he brought a lot of value to his team. And if he can carry that in towards next season with some of that hype, I think that Nightmare is also someone that I would put up there with Fire for as far as someone who could definitely make some noise and be able to maybe put a spot in towards that next up and coming AR because that's a really hard role to fill. But I feel
Yeah.
like based off of what he was able to do and some of the talking like around him was definitely like he's got a great mindset, and this could be someone who we could see eventually in the CDL as well. So
It's
those are my
wild.
two. I think
That Carnage Gaming roster, I think
surprised everyone.
is still being slept on going from last year into this next year.
Yeah,
I
I think
still
so
feel like
too.
there's not enough people talking about that Carnage Gaming roster. How do you think X Pros will perform in challenges this year? Because personally, I know they're going to get gunned by me, and says Bulky. Yeah, okay, we'll see about that. I think that you're going to be getting a bit of a boys club when it comes to, are you a former pro? Then I'll team with you. Are you not a former pro? I'm not willing to team with you. It just, I think,
Yeah.
comes down to, out of that group of former pros, I would say in the last, we'll say 2 years, we'll say between Black Ops 4 and Modern Warfare, former pros from those 2 years, if they can formulate an incredible 4 and then put in the work to be a major contender, not just ride off their laurels that we are former pros, we're going to beat everybody. If they put in the work, they look to start dominating, I think that the former pro players are probably going to still be making up the top 5% of challenges.
It's hard to make the argument that they won't be. And as much as we have a lot of great up and coming talent, I think that there's just a lot of these players are going to have just a level edge over, some of the people
Agreed.
that just haven't been able to compete at the highest level. Like there's not going to be a whole lot of pressure on them individually to be able to perform. They're just here to do what they have to do to be able to get themselves back. And I can maybe see a lot of them maybe bringing in one, like up and comer, like you bring up an example like Standy, like
Yeah, or
Standy was,
Fire, any of those guys we talked
yeah,
about. Yep.
right. A lot of those guys can absolutely be brought in towards that roster of like 3 previous pros, and that could be just that up and coming Scumpy essentially from way back when in Black Ops 1 that you have on your team that he can just go rogue and he can do things in 4v4 that he might not have been able to do in 5v5 because your ability to individually perform is definitely going to be more outstanding than it was in a 5v5 type of game. So I think that that's very likely, but I think it'll primarily be dominated by X pros for sure.
I'm trying to think of this. Good questions tonight. Good questions. And hey, we
Yeah,
are
great
just short
questions.
of the hour mark, and that includes our 10-minute pre-timer and about 15 minutes worth of questions. So we did better this time, Austin. Better.
Yay.
I just come
Golf
down to
clap,
we
right?
just gotta find a way. Indeed, golf club. Yeah, so very nice. We just gotta find a way to get these things rolling, man. But there's so many topics to talk about when we go do these
Well,
shows. It's like
yeah, there's a lot.
it's like if there's not a lot to talk about, we're like, do we run a show?
Exactly,
Probably
right?
not. And then we wait for like 2 weeks and there's too much to talk about. But that will conclude things here tonight for the Defuse. We'll try to be back next week for an episode number 3. But at least you can guarantee that when we start getting into the CDL season, you'll be catching us weekly then, if not regularly, to do recap episodes like we had done in last season. So we'll be around more often. Make sure you follow along here on the channel. And if you're not already checking out the VOD on YouTube, you can do that there as well. But until next time there, friends, don't let that fuse fizzle out. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.